Yes, I wish I was talking to you in better circumstances right now, but the nation is currently raging out in protests and riots all across the 50 states, and we've seen a lot of destruction, a lot of voicing, and a lot of grieving that's also taken place. My first question to you has to be, when we are trying to explain this to our community members or our children or our youth, how should we address the situation right now? And what kind of information do they need to know about what happened to George Floyd that is so relevant?
First of all, I'm not surprised by what happened. It's been a long, long time. This has been going on for the African American community. They've been suffering for centuries and decades. They've been fighting for their rights, and by extension, fighting for the rights of everybody who's in a minority, including and especially the South Asian American, Indian American community. I think Indian Americans, South Asian Americans should look at this very carefully and rise up and support the African American community, who are really, really, as you put it, hurting right now. They're hurting very, very badly. They have faced this systemic racism for a long time, for generations, injustice. And if it weren't for the struggles of the African American community, listen to this very carefully.
Right.
If it was not for the struggles of the African American community, all minorities, that includes the South Asian community, our community, the Latino community, Asians as a whole, nobody would be able to get opportunities in this country. It's all because of the struggles of the African American community trying to get to an equal plane. So this is a very, very sad development. At the same time, it's been a long time coming. I'm surprised that this kind of an uprising hasn't been louder for much sooner. It should have taken place a long time ago, because the systemic racism, the systemic injustices against people of color have been going on for far too long. It needs to stop now.
For our community members, let's have a little discussion on systemic racism and internalized racism. What can you tell us in terms of educating our own folks into what has happened and why the outrage is so massive? And also, this conversation about systemic racism has been happening for so many years now. What do we do at this point?
First of all, we should come out and support the African American community completely without any reservations. We should be out there in droves. We should be out there to support them. This could affect, this will and can affect and has affected our community and affected many of them for a long time as well. Don't forget, I just wanted to bring this example and remind everybody that just in the year 2015, there was an Indian who was visiting his son and grandkid from India, Suresh Bhai Patel, in Madison, Alabama. And all he was doing was taking a walk around the neighborhood, his son's neighborhood, and someone, apparently a white person, not apparently, reportedly, a white person called the police to say that there's this black person snooping around looking at houses and garages and the like. White police officers showed up. They looked at him, asked him what he was doing there. He didn't understand them. He spoke Gujarati. And instead of trying to figure out who he was, etc., you can see it all on the police dash cam. They just picked him up, slammed him to the ground, and left him paralyzed for life. Eventually, no justice was served, even after the federal government brought charges, and the charges were dropped against the white police officer. Our community has been complacent for far too long, Aditi. Our community has, because they've been touted as the community in the higher educated percentile, in the higher income percentile, therefore the privileged community, they think they're immune to this, and this can never happen to them. I have a lot of stories to tell. So we probably have to do it another time, but I have a lot of stories to tell. I have personally witnessed the attacks on our own community back in the 1970s. I was the only journalist covering the Indian community back then in the 1970s. Okay. I remember the Hindu temple in Flushing, Queens. It was a brand new Hindu temple at that time, just been built. A lot of pride for the few Hindus that were around in Flushing. I remember the white mobs that used to come and attack the Indian community. They're the small Indian community. They would rip off the saris of Indian women on the streets. They called them dot heads. They spray painted graffiti on the Hindu temple. Police didn't do anything to protect them at the time. And I remember as a young journalist, the Indian community were looking to talk to somebody. I was the only reporter around, and therefore they looked to me sort of like a leader, which I wasn't, because our Indian community groups were fledgling, they were brand new, and had not ever organized for something. There were just a handful of people that were in any one or two of the groups that existed at the time. And the community reached out to me by telephone and said, "You got to do something and help us." And I remember, I was just about 19 or 20, and a reporter and editing a newspaper and all the rest of it. And I went to the precinct, the 109th Police Precinct in Flushing, Queens, and I asked to see the police commander. And they said, "Well, who are you?" And I said, "Well, I'm a member of the Indian American community. I'm a reporter, and my community is being harassed by white mobs, and we need justice. We need police protection. I'd like to speak to the commander." So they didn't even believe I was Indian. They said, "You look too white to be Indian." I said, "Well, that's going to be a long story to explain. But no, I'm Indian, and I'm here to fight for my community." They threatened me with arrest if I didn't leave. I said, "All I want to do is meet with your commander and ask for protection for my community. They are frightened out there." They declined, and they said, "If you don't get out of here, we're going to arrest you." I had a bit of an argument. I almost got arrested. And just as I was about to think of what should I do, should I leave? Should I let them arrest me? Out comes this gentleman in a white shirt, obviously a senior officer. These two saluted him. And he came out to me, asked me my name. And I told him who I was. And he said, "Young man, I'm impressed with you. Come on in, let's have a chat." I was lucky.
Right.
He got me in. I was the commander of the precinct. William Pirro was his name at the time, I recall. He invited me in, talked to me. He said, "What's the problem?" He asked me, and I told him my community is suffering. Nobody's there to protect them. Your officers are doing nothing. You got to do something. Luckily, fortunately, after I spoke to him and established a rapport, they brought in police protection for the Hindu temple. Now, this is a true story. This is my own narrative of what happened. But there were many, many, many such instances throughout, and they continue to this day. So our community really has to wake up, and all communities have to wake up, including the majority white community. There are the underprivileged among them who need to wake up, and they are waking up. They know that they too will suffer. It's going to evolve into this thing of the rich versus the poor. I see what's going to happen. I can just see it from the experience I've had over more than 4 decades in journalism, that this is going to not stop here. It'll get worse. It'll become a matter of a struggle between the privileged and the underprivileged. And it's about time we all stood together in sympathy and caring for one another as human beings.
In terms of these protests, let's have a discussion on this. Your take on what is happening throughout the nation, a range of it, from peaceful demonstrations, officers kneeling and marching with the protesters, to riots and looting. Could you explain why this is happening in America right now? And, for communities such as us who are here in New York City and are at unrest about this, what are we supposed to, process from all of this?
Very good question. There's several answers to that. I'll try to sum it up very quickly, but a very good question. Don't forget, we've been through a pandemic. We're in the midst of a pandemic.
Right.
People have been locked up at home, sitting in there and waiting for some sense of normalcy to get back, some sense of security, that they won't die going out there and meeting someone else, having someone else breathe upon them, etc., etc. There's been this frustration in all of us. We're naturally human, and we want to socialize. We want to see other people. We want to be back to get to a regular life, as I said, normalcy and all the rest of it. There's been that pent-up frustration. And then this happens. Now, obviously, the reaction was genuine. It was outrage. Nobody should accept what happened. We saw cold-blooded murder. In fact, one of the commentators being interviewed on one of the mainstream networks put it very succinctly and correctly. We witnessed a lynching. All of us saw a lynching on video. It was captured on video. We witnessed a murder, a lynching of a black individual. All right.
Right.
If it doesn't spark outrage, something is wrong with any human being that doesn't get outraged by that. The outpouring of grief, natural. The outpouring of outrage, natural. Demonstrations, natural. The violence was being carried out very obviously. You can spot them in the crowds by outsiders who take advantage. Typically, in these situations, it is outsiders who take advantage of a situation like this and then indulge in looting and all the rest of it. These are not people who really care about what happened to George Floyd, what happened to this poor guy with an officer's knee on him, choking him to death. His life leaving him as we're watching this horrible thing. By the way, I couldn't finish watching that video. I'm a hardcore journalist, covered crime myself, but that made me cry. And every time I look at it, I feel like crying. So I can't even bear to watch it. Um, the violence is the outpouring, the demonstrations are natural. The violence is not natural, but it always happens in a large gathering like this, where you're going to have those few antisocial elements and opportunists who will go out there, use these occasions to do something else that is not nobody wants to see. Nobody, the African American community doesn't want to see it. No community wants to see. No police officers see it. Also, a point to make here: obviously, not every police officer is a criminal. You have rogue officers in every department. You have rogue people in humanity. So it's not like there's a blanket blame. However, in the police departments, that's something I've covered also, the police departments, and you heard my experience. I just narrated to you
Right.
about what happened when I went to that precinct in Flushing. They have been trained for decades. The police officers, police departments have this training, I believe, with a sort of militaristic approach, so that when you have that badge, you believe you're the be all and the end all. That's not true. You, as an officer, are serving your community, and therefore you have a responsibility to protecting, to caring for your community. Yes, you deal with criminals in a certain way, but you're not to be cruel. No police officer is trained, I believe, or should be trained to be cruel and inhuman to anybody. And so there is a problem in training of police officers. We keep having this within communities. We
Right.
keep talking about to resensitizing them to communities, to having community outreach and education. It doesn't seem to work. I think there's a systemic problem with what's going on. But I wanted to point out here, one of the other things, as a journalist, I've also talked to several law enforcement officials on camera. And one of the things I have asked them is, why don't we bring back the old, the beat, the policeman on patrol in the neighborhood, walking around, so he knows who everybody is, he or she. They know the neighborhood knows them.
Right.
Trust them. I think it's a very important thing, a very important solution, one of the solutions that should be examined. And as far as our community, it's the same thing. This is affecting every community. And
Right.
therefore, our community needs to be a part of this and be a part of the change. Not sit back and think you're privileged and that you have a great job and you're the CEO of some big company. Who cares? You are the CEO today. That can be changed in a snap if the extremists, if those who are not good, the bad apples, if they come out in a majority and they decide they don't like, for instance, Indians anymore, let me tell you something, and this is from my experience, it can change. You
Right.
can all be sent back home. We've had that. We've had that with the internment of the Japanese back during the World War II. There was all that happened, where the Japanese were put in internment camps and things like that. It can all happen. And so everybody, this is a wake up call for everybody in our community.
Yeah.
Needs to right now wake up and see what's happening out there and make sure they're part of the action to stop the injustice.
Today, former Vice President Biden actually called out on the Congress to do something about this, to actually make a change in legislation. But he also actually called out for police reformation and having that training process. Do you agree with that? And is that the future that we're trying to achieve from this? I'm trying to understand what the next few weeks are going to look like, and what the entire purpose is at the end.
Another good question. Now, I agree with the fact, yes, there's got to be a reform police department, but the thing is, they're talking about it for 30 years. It's, at least 30 years, everybody's talking about it. Reform the police department, nothing's happening. Nothing's happening. Because the whole process, the training process itself, it has to start from scratch when a police officer is trained. The whole attitude is, you're not just this guy with the badge. You earn that badge. You earn that badge that you proudly display, because you are chosen from our communities, from us. We're the ones that choose you. We select, we educate you, we groom you to be there. But what's your job? Protecting us, not hurting us, not killing us, not bullying us, not going out there and flaunting that badge and saying, listen, you listen to me or else. That's not how you deal. That's not policing. Look at the British. They have the best police force in the world, unarmed.
Right.
In all of London, you can walk around. The police officers only recently have some of them that are especially armed to deal with terrorism. But otherwise, the regular police officer carries a baton, a walkie-talkie, walks around, never has to use any weapon. It's a great example. That's community policing. That's what police forces are for. What was your other question? The other part of your question that you
What's
asked
going
me?
to happen in the next few weeks?
I think in the next few weeks, there's got to be. Here's one of the things I think: legislative reform. Yes, that's what you asked me about. Whether Biden was talking about more congressional bills and all the rest of it. That's not going to help. We have enough legislation everywhere. You have them at the state level, the council level, the municipal levels, and county levels, and the national level. You have all kinds of bills that are introduced. That's not going to help.
Right.
We need a change in attitude. If the change in attitude doesn't happen within a certain group of people, then those who think they can bring change need to run for office. We got to start having more people run for office. Thankfully, there are many people running for office. Communities need to be galvanized into putting leaders out there who will be part of the solution and not part of the old system of just letting things the status quo remaining as it is. We are supposed to be the most humane society on the planet. Frankly, the United States is supposed to be that. We're not showing that to the world right now. The entire world looks at us and I bet you they're all laughing at us. I don't know for sure, but I can bet you I get emails and I get texts, as probably you do, from around the world, from people who reflect, who tell me what's going on in America, what's going on in your country. And frankly, I get embarrassed. But I think the next few weeks are critical. The election is right around the corner. It's going to be in November. There are primaries coming up as we speak, as you and I speak. In a couple of weeks, there'll be primaries. But I think it's most important people now get out there and exercise their vote, exercise their franchise. And listen, if you feel strongly about an issue and you want change, you better run for office. I've been asked to run for office several times. I've kept pushing back against the idea because I think I'm more useful as a media person and a commentator as I'm doing right now. But I mean, I think the younger generation is where it's going to be at. The younger generation is their future. We guys have had our ride, and I think I'm still young enough. But generally, I think the new generation now, they've woken up. They're doing a great job out there. If you look at the demonstrators, the real protesters, and you see them talking to police officers where they go face to face. I've been watching the footage very carefully. These young people are very, very, very good at what they're doing. They're not violent. They're standing there with their hands up. They're talking to the officers, saying their piece. The officers are listening to them, and all is well. Those are the real demonstrators, because that's the right. Every citizen has a right to protest, and they're doing that. And the officers I've been seeing also have seen that and realize that, respect that, except in a couple of instances where things got out of hand and should not have got out of hand. But I think that's what's going to, next few weeks, this is going to continue. It's not going to end soon. I don't think it's going to end at all for a long time to come now, until the attitudes change. And the first place where the change is going to have to come, obviously now, are the nation's police departments.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you again for your time here on ITV Gold with us. I'd like for you to give one last message out to our audience, but also perhaps to everyone that is, partaking in these protests in both New York, New Jersey, and across the nation, and perhaps a word of wisdom to all of them that want to advocate for their voice right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think continue to make your voices heard. Do so peacefully, as everybody, the vast majority, have been doing. Obviously, the looters and all the rest of it we've been seeing on television are not genuine demonstrators or genuine people who believe in this subject and in the cause at all. They're just opportunists who are and basically criminals. Those who are doing what they're doing, looting all the shops and everything. They're not even thinking about the fact we're just getting through. We're still in the midst of a pandemic. We're trying to return to some semblance of normalcy. And now all the businesses that we're about to open are destroyed. So they've done nobody any favors. They've, in fact, set society back quite a bit. But for those of you who are genuinely upset, you must let your voices be heard. You must protest and be the change. All of you be the change and a peaceful change. We're all Americans. We all care very much about the country. We all care very much about our children, our children's children, and the future generations that will come after them. We want a good America, a beautiful America, and it's up to us. It's up to you guys. It's up to the young folks out there to make your voices heard. Don't be afraid. As long as you're doing the right thing, respect the law, which the vast majority of you are doing. Respect the law. The law is the law. And continue. Change will come. Just stay at it. Be diligent, and do not stand for injustice. Injustice should be repelled peacefully and using the law. Absolutely. If you see injustice, you must bring it to the attention of the law and fight it.